In recent weeks, Apple has found itself at the center of an economic storm that could become the most serious crisis in its history. After Donald Trump officially confirmed the introduction of new 100% tariffs on imports from China, a wave of consequences swept through American business. But the hardest hit was Apple. According to reputable sources including the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, the company's management has already held several closed meetings with shareholders to discuss scenarios in case the tariff war between Washington and Beijing drags on. The main problem is that over 90% of Apple's production capacity is located in China at Foxconn, Pegatron, and Luxshare factories. With current tariffs, production costs rise by tens of percent, turning the release of each new iPhone into an economically unprofitable endeavor. Insiders close to the board claim that Tim Cook personally stated that if the situation does not change, the issue of halting shipments to the United States will arise. For Apple, this is an apocalyptic scenario. Stopping sales in its main market could trigger a stock collapse. The situation reached such a level of seriousness that Tim Cook was forced to personally negotiate on two fronts with the White House and Chinese authorities. According to Financial Times, Cook has already met twice with Trump administration officials, insisting on excluding Apple from the tariff list, arguing that the company is a national symbol of the United States and one of its largest taxpayers. Analysts note that such an exemption could trigger a chain reaction. If Apple is granted one, other corporations will demand the same, putting Trump in a difficult political position. On one hand, the president claims he wants to protect American manufacturers. On the other hand, his policies could strike at the flagship of American technology. Sources close to the White House claim that Trump promised not to allow the company's collapse, but concrete measures remain unclear. Several options are under consideration, including temporary tariff deferrals for high-tech goods, a special export license, or relocating part of production to Mexico and Vietnam. The last option is already actively discussed within Apple. According to Nikkei Asia, the company has accelerated the construction of new production lines in Ho Chi Minh City and Monterrey, Mexico. Experts warn, however, that this will not solve the problem immediately. Even relocating part of the supply chain will take years while tariffs are already in effect. Beijing, for its part, is not willing to concede. Chinese state media openly declare that U.S. tariff policy is an act of economic aggression and that China is ready to respond with symmetric measures. According to South China Morning Post, Chinese authorities are preparing a package of restrictions against American companies operating in the domestic market, including Apple, Tesla, and Boeing. Possible measures include higher taxes, restrictions on access to rare earth materials, and even slowing customs clearance. For Apple, this is a catastrophic risk. The company not only manufactures but also sells millions of devices in China, and losing this market could be fatal. Against this backdrop, global markets have already begun to react. Investors fear that tariff escalation will disrupt plans to release new iPhone and MacBook models. Moreover, according to Morgan Stanley analysts, a potential disruption of logistics between the United States and China could trigger a global electronics shortage. The chain reaction could affect companies not directly connected to Apple, as it is the largest customer of microchips from TSMC, displays from LG and Samsung, and provides billion-dollar contracts to American startups involved in component development. Meanwhile, according to Politico, emergency measures to support the tech sector are already being discussed behind the scenes in the U.S. Congress. One option is temporary tax relief for companies that can prove they are suffering from tariffs. However, so far this is only talk. No one knows how far Trump is willing to go, where the theme of bringing jobs back from China has become central. He actively uses this narrative, calling Apple an example of how an American corporation should produce at home rather than overseas. Experts note, however, that implementing such slogans is technically impossible. The US simply does not have the infrastructure to assemble hundreds of millions of devices annually. Insiders from Silicon Valley report that a nervous atmosphere prevails inside Apple. Mid-level managers have been instructed to prepare reports on potential losses under each scenario of tariff escalation. One Foxconn engineer, speaking anonymously to Reuters, said that some factories have already begun cutting production volumes and redistributing orders across lines to minimize risks. At the same time, China can use Apple as a political pressure tool, hinting that if the US does not ease tariffs, Beijing could restrict component exports or even suspend operations at some facilities. Some analysts believe Apple is caught between two fires. On one side is the US administration demanding production be brought home. On the other is the Chinese government treating the company as a pawn in a geopolitical game. In such a situation, any move could be fatal. According to former White House economic advisor Lawrence Summers, if Washington does not back down, America risks hurting itself rather than China. Meanwhile, Tim Cook must play the diplomat. He tries to maintain public calm, but behind the scenes conducts endless negotiations with officials from both countries. According to the New York Times, the Apple CEO has already sent personal letters to the Trump administration and the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, urging a rational approach and the preservation of global supply chains. So far, however, both sides appear to be raising the stakes. China is intensifying its Buy Chinese campaign, promoting its Huawei and Xiaomi brands, which experts believe could greatly benefit from Apple's problems. The world is holding its breath. At stake is not just the fate of one company, but the stability of the entire global technology industry. If Apple truly halts shipments, it could trigger a domino effect: rising electronics prices, collapses in related markets, chip shortages, and job losses in the US. Goldman Sachs estimates that each week of Apple production downtime could cost the global economy over $5 billion. That is why analysts call the situation an economic black swan capable of changing the entire structure of global trade. Today, the situation is developing at an unpredictable pace. Trump continues to insist on his policy, China responds in kind, and Tim Cook may be fighting the most difficult battle of his career, the fight for Apple's survival in the era of tariff wars. Although officials try to avoid public statements, behind the scenes a phrase is increasingly heard that alarms investors worldwide: Apple may not survive this storm without losses. Amid the rapidly unfolding crisis, speculation is growing about possible internal reshuffles within Apple. Sources close to the company report that part of the board of directors is considering creating a separate crisis unit tasked with urgently reviewing the entire logistics strategy and developing new supply routes. Right now, time is working against Apple. Each day of delay translates into millions in losses and growing investor mistrust. Experts are certain that if Tim Cook cannot find a compromise between Trump and Beijing in the coming months, the world may witness the largest crisis in the history of the American tech industry, a crisis that will reveal just how fragile the global economy has become in the era of trade wars.